the hell is that?
Nothing, Sarge. Don't worry about it. It's just a scratch. It's all right.
We are talking House of the Dead 2. This is a 2005 movie directed by Michael Hurst. Now, the first movie, of course, was based on the Sega video game As Is This, and the first movie was directed by Uwe Boll and was often talked about in one of the kind of the worst movies of all time. I actually didn't mind it as much as a lot of people. The second one, obviously, Uwe Boll not having nothing to do with this one really, and is a kind of a different zombie film. It's much more of a somewhat traditional style zombie film with the not having the stylistic approach that Uwe Boll had with the first movie. But it does connect. We have a university in America have got a zombie outbreak through Sid Haig's character, a professor, doing experiments trying to bring back the dead, actually with one of the survivors from the original movie as a kind of a test subject. And of course the zombie plague gets out. At this point, obviously, sometime after the initial movie, the government all knows about the zombies now. They have a special task force in place, and they are sent there to try and contain the zombie virus, as well as getting a blood sample from patient zero to try and be able to cure it, and also try and rescue any survivors. They are accompanied by a group of special forces types. What will happen? You have to watch the movie to find out. So, obviously, once again based on the House of the Dead video game series by Sega, although this one feels more like a Resident Evil game adaptation, to be honest with you, with a little bit less focus on the puzzles and stuff and more the action, but just the kind of the whole Raccoon City thing is somewhat kind of reminiscent here, I would say. So as I've mentioned, this one doesn't have the kind of the hyper stylistic directorial choices of Uwe Boll. It is more of a, it almost feels a little bit like the Return of the Living Dead sequels in some respects. What works about this movie? Like I've said, this is taken a little bit more seriously than the first movie, and I would say it has a reasonable production value, very much like the first one was actually, didn't have too small of a budget, to be honest, and this one feels like, again, you have a reasonable production value. You've got a number of familiar faces here. As I've mentioned, you've got Sid Haig in a relatively small role as a kind of as a college lecturer. You've got Ed Quinn, Emmanuel Vega, Sticky Fingers, Theo Rossi, Victoria Pratt, James Parks, Dan Southworth, among a few other kind of familiar faces that you would have seen on TV and kind of B-movies and stuff like that. The special effects in the zombies, I think, are for the most part very good. We do see some very kind of decayed people and looking pretty gruesome at times, and there's plenty of gunplay. Now, House of the Dead video game was a light gun shooting game, so this isn't going to be more of a cerebral film. Obviously, it has to tie into the game to a point. So this is much more of a shoot-'em-up film, although we do have a few, sequences where our kind of protagonists have to kind of try and use their smarts to outsmart the zombies and things like that. There's quite a lot of kind of fun characters within our military unit, all of whom are quite distinct and kind of memorable. And there are there's one despicable character, for example, that keeps like taking photographs of all the female dead zombies and things like that. So there's some pretty some pretty hanky stuff kind of going on here as well. It's pretty gory. There's plenty of kind of practical blood and stuff on display here. I just didn't think the acting was too bad. Like I've said, these guys are taking it seriously for the most part. I mean, there are a few kind of like light-hearted kind of jokey moments, and a few kind of nods to other franchises and stuff like that, but obviously in particular kind of horror films. But everyone here is kind of playing along for the most part, taking it relatively kind of serious. Again, if you kind of like the Return of the Living Dead movies, it kind of is that vibe, is the best way I'll describe it. So not out and out jokey, spoofy, but a kind of a wry kind of sense of humour in there as well. And obviously the kind of the practical effects, again, kind of remind me a little bit of the Return to the Living Dead sort of series. It's much more kind of action-packed than those films, however, so it is a little bit lacking in regards to any real kind of like plot twists and stuff like that. And you do feel it is taking kind of elements from other movies and video games. So that is one of the things I would say maybe on a little bit of a negative. It doesn't seem to have really its own voice. Now, say what you will about the first movie, I felt that had quite a unique feel to it. Like I said, it had a Matrix-esque style, a hyper reality to it, whilst this one doesn't have that kind of it's as much of its own personality. Now that may or may not be a good thing depending on how you feel about the first film. I would say this is certainly a more competently made film in regards to a narrative and things like that, but you know, it is what it is. It just depends what you prefer ultimately. I think for me, it doesn't really, although I think it's probably a stronger film in regards to the way it was made and the kind of the stronger narrative, it's just not quite as memorable, I don't think. I mean, I'd seen both of these movies before, and I remember a lot more about the first movie than I did about this second one, even though I actually think this second one is probably, realistically, slightly better film. I do think some of our kind of characters seem a little heartless when their teammates are getting killed. I mean, I understand that they can't cure them and stuff like that, but they just seem to leave them behind without really any type of remorse or that sort of thing. It just, you know, for a movie which has a very strong military presence and, you know, leave no man behind and all that, they just seem to discard their injured comrades with kind of no real second thought. And although the environment here is that the government knows about zombies, we're not that far into it, so it's not as if people haven't lost their humanity at that point. I think some of the acting from some of the smaller parts maybe isn't quite as good. I think all the major parts are played pretty well. As I said, there's a reasonable amount of established actors here, but there's maybe some kind of like, you know, some not quite as good performances from some of the kind of the smaller parts here. But it's ultimately a little bit cheesy. I think the kind of the upbeat kind of music doesn't really kind of help. It's never really a particularly kind of scary zombie film, and therefore feels kind of quite a kind of a B movie in a lot of ways. It's quite fast paced, but loses some of the tension because of that. Now, in some ways, I think the as I say, the first film, despite its flaws, is more memorable. But I do think this film is a more traditionally constructed movie and therefore is probably better overall. So I'll give this one a 6 out of 10. I actually think it's a reasonable entry in a kind of a zombie movie franchise. And like I said, I didn't mind the first one. I'm not one of these people who will just jump on a UA Bowl film just because it's a UA Bowl film. But this one is certainly a more traditional narrative and a more traditional style zombie film. And I think if you are a zombie fan and you've not seen it and you've been put off by the first one, then so you can kind of check this one out because it doesn't really follow on too much, to be honest. You can watch it as the same thing. It has some fun characters and some kind of interesting looking zombies and stuff like that. So 6 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.